Kicking off at number 5, the Kaz 2, which perhaps is one of the most terrifying modern instances of the term ghost ship and one of the most profoundly tragic unsolved mysteries of the deep blue sea. The Kaz 2, which was publicly dubbed the Ghost Yacht, was a 9.8 meter catamaran which was found drifting listlessly 88 nautical miles off the northeastern coast of Australia on the 20th of April 2007. The 3 men aboard, who were all residents of Perth in Western Australia, were all incredibly experienced sailors. They were 56-year-old Derek Batten and brothers Peter Tunstall and James Tunstall, who were 69 and 63 respectively. Their whereabouts still remains a mystery to this day, and the fate of these 3 men perhaps may never be known. What made it even stranger is that when the Kaz 2 was eventually found by the Coast Guard, there were no signs of distress, no signs of boat damage, or even a struggle between the 3 men. It was as if they just vanished out of thin air. Coffee cups were left out and all the life jackets on board remained stowed away, indicating that the trio never felt at risk. In an even more curious turn of events, rescue teams discovered video footage of the 3 men on a handheld camera, seemingly hours before they disappeared. It showed them fishing, relaxing in the sun with the motor off, and offered no clues as to how these 3 experienced sailors disappeared at sea. Although an inquiry was later drawn, no definitive conclusions were ever reached, and only theories remain about the ultimate fate of the Kaz 2. Coming in at number 4, the Lady Loverbond. Of course, no list would be complete without a good old sea shanty of jilted lovers and ghostly revenge. As the legend goes, the Lady Loverbond was a schooner that is alleged to have been wrecked on the Goodwin Sands just off the southern coast of Kent on the 13th of February 1749. But if you ask any old sailor worth their salt, they'll tell you that it just so happens to have a habit of reappearing every 50 or so years as a ghost ship. As the story goes, the captain of the ship, a man named Simon Reed, had just been married to his bride Annetta and was celebrating the joyous occasion with a cruise bound for Oporto in Portugal. Now, it is high time to mention that a long-standing sailor's superstition was that back in the day it was grave bad luck to bring a woman on board, and in many ways the legend of the Lady Loverbond is a cautionary tale that exemplifies that fact. According to the tale, the ship's first mate, a man named John Rivers, was a rival for the hand of the captain's young wife, and in a jealous fit of rage he killed the crewman manning the ship's wheel and steered the vessel into the treacherous Goodwin Sands, killing absolutely everyone on board. And if you're asking me, that is a stark overreaction. But nevertheless, since that fateful day in 1749, the Lady Loverbond has been sighted on numerous occasions with an ethereal, ghostly glow, eternally bound to wander the ocean.
Number 3, the Mary Celeste. We've heard about her. One of the most famous real-life ghost ships, of course, is the mystery of the Mary Celeste. And I say mystery because it's still a mystery. She was found drifting slowly through the waters of the Atlantic Ocean in 1872, sailing completely unharmed and untouched with all its sails still up, the crew's personal belongings intact, and a cargo of more than 1,700 barrels of booze untouched. She set sail from New York City with more than 1,700 full barrels of alcohol destined for Italy for distribution. On board were 10 people, including Captain Briggs, his wife, and their daughter. Over the next 2 weeks, the ship encountered, well, something bizarre. 10 days later, the vessel was spotted by a British brig, De Gratia. The crew from that ship boarded the Mary Celeste and discovered it deserted. Yeah, no crew. Spooky. First thing I'm thinking is Bermuda Triangle. Always, always, always. Ghost ships, anything lost at sea, Bermuda Triangle, immediately. But apparently a British ship found the Mary Celeste on December 4th, 1872 near the Strait of Gibraltar. So, alright, so not the Bermuda Triangle then? No? Alright. Yeah, it couldn't have been pirates either, because apparently they like to drink stuff. It was apparently late reaching Italy, and this British ship went out looking for her, confused where she had gotten lost. The strangeness comes with the boarding. Below deck, things looked completely normal. Absolutely no signs of attack or struggle. The only things missing were one lifeboat and the captain's logbook, and most importantly, the entire crew. Theories of crew mutiny, weather phenomenons like giant waterspouts, or even consumption of poisonous foods came into play. After passing Santa Maria Island, the Azores, on November 25th, 1872, there were no more entries. Devoid of all crew, but strangely stocked to the nines with food and booze and all of the crew's personal belongings like jewelry and clothes. With no clear explanation, the Mary Celeste remains one of the most puzzling ghost ships around. They still have no idea what happened to those people. After the salvage hearings, Mary Celeste continued in service under new owners, but in 1885, her captain deliberately wrecked her off the coast of Haiti as part of an attempted insurance fraud. Number 2, Lady Loverbond. A ghostly story of lust, love, jealousy, and rage. the dark history of this haunted love boat. In 1748, the day before Valentine's Day, it was set to sail as a celebration of the ship's captain's wedding. On February 13th, 1748, the ship contained by the newly married Simon Peel was carrying his new wife Annetta and their wedding guests from London to Oporto, Portugal. Unknown to the captain, his first mate Rivers was also in love with Annetta, and in a fit of insane jealousy, seized the helm after murdering the helmsman and deliberately steered the ship towards the Goodwin Sands, where it ran aground, cracking the ship in half and unfortunately drowning everybody on board. And there, the story might have ended, had it not been witnessed for all the claims to have seen the ghostly ship appear every 50 years. Some of them even passing close enough to hear the sounds of celebration. Apparently on the 13th of February, the Edenbridge spots Lady Lovibond's ship exactly 50 years later. It was reported seen by ship captain James Westlake, and according to his testimony, he almost collided with the ship before he could finally turn the steering wheel to avoid the collision. Dude, close call, just shows up out of nowhere? Like, what? He also recorded in his logbook the ship was headed straight for the Goodwin Sands. Other sightings have been reported at 50-year intervals, except for 1984, when the ship failed to materialize. 1798, 1848, 1898, and 1948 witnessed the ship's sightseeings. Even some boats sent out rescuers, assuming that it was in distress or lost at sea, but later it could never be found. Yo. A tale as old as time, huh? Jealousy, that'll do it. Yep, always does. And number 1, the Flying Dutchman. In all maritime folklore, this ghost ship has left quite an impact like no other. It's the ghost ship, the oldest one in the book. Well, maybe not the oldest, but definitely the most prolific and well known. The Pirates of the Caribbean, the Dead Man's Chest is literally the story of this. The legend, Vanderdecken, the captain, is on his way towards the East Indies with the confidence and determination. He tried to steer his ship through the horrid weather conditions of the Cape of the Good Hope, but failed miserably. Even after, of course, vowing to drift until his own demise, you see, he apparently signed a little deal with you-know-who. He swore that he would succeed through the perils of waves even if he had to sail until his judgment day. The devil apparently heard his oath and took him up on it, and now the Dutchman is condemned to stay at sea forever. Legend says that since then, they have been cursed to sail the oceans for eternity. To this day, hundreds of fishermen and sailors from the deep sea have claimed to have even witnessed the Flying Dutchman, continuing its never-ending voyage across never-ending waters. The most famous sightings, I would say, is that of Prince George V of Wales. He was on a 3-year voyage in 1880 with his older brother Prince Albert of Wales and their tutor. The prince's log records say the following for the pre-dawn hours of July 11, 1881 near Australia. Quote, 4 a.m. The Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. A strange red light as a phantom ship glow, which lights the masts, spars, and sails of a brig 200 yards distant as she came up on the port bow, but on arriving there was no vestige or nor any sign whatever of a material ship. Seen right away to the horizon, 13 persons altogether saw her. That's a prince writing, so yeah, that's pretty good source material, I'd say. This is horrific. Imagine a ghost ship faded by red light pulling up towards your ship in the middle of the night, then just cruises on by. Yeah, that'd be the end of me, for sure.
In 5th place, we have the Mary Celeste. Probably the most famous mystery ship on our list today is the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that was found drifting in December of 1872 off the Azores with her crew of 10 nowhere to be found. The Canadian brigantine Di Grazia found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition under partial sail and with her lifeboat missing. Now the ship was, missing a lifeboat. There were signs that something had gone wrong, and to be specific, one of its pumps was dismantled, but the ship was still seaworthy and there was no hint as to why the crew and passengers had abandoned it. The last entry in her log was dated 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th, and still had plenty of provisions when she was found. Her cargo of alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board were ever seen or heard from ever again. Among the missing was the captain, his wife, and their very young daughter. On December 23rd of 1872, during a court hearing to try and establish just what happened, Frederick Solly Flood, who was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, ordered an examination of the Mary Celeste, which was carried out by John Austin, surveyor of shipping, with the assistance of a diver, Ricardo Puntonato. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow caused by a sharp instrument and found possible traces of scarlet fluid on the captain's sword. His report emphasized that the ship did not appear to have been struck by heavy weather, citing a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in in its place. Now, Austin did not acknowledge that the vial might have been replaced since the abandonment, nor did the court raise this point. Fortunato's report on the hull concluded that the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. A further inspection by a group of Royal Navy captains endorsed Austin's opinion that the cuts on the bow had been caused deliberately. They also discovered stains on one of the ship's rails that might have been bodily liquids, together with a deep mark possibly caused by an axe. Now, these findings strengthened Flood's suspicions that human wrongdoing, rather than natural disaster, lay behind the mystery. On January 22nd of 1873, he sent the reports to the Board of Trade in London, adding his own conclusion that the crew had got at the alcohol on board and killed the Briggs family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They had cut the bows to simulate a collision, then fled in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. Flood thought that Morehouse and his men were hiding something, specifically that Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and that the log had been doctored. He just couldn't accept that the Mary Celeste could have traveled so far while uncrewed. Now, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, helped make the ship famous with a short story vaguely based on the event, in which foul play explained the enigma. A 2007 theory, reported by the Smithsonian, suggests that perhaps the captain made the call to abandon ship in sight of land after the ship's pumps became fouled. Now, normally it would be unusual for a captain to abandon a seaworthy vessel, but the captain may not have been able to tell how much water the ship was taking on with the pumps broken. The ship was also slightly off course and had been battling bad weather, which may have prompted the captain to take the chance at land when he could. To this day, the crew of the mysterious vessel was never found. And despite many theories, no one can say with surety why the ship was abandoned in the first place. So the Mary Celeste sailed for 12 years after it was abandoned and finally struck the Rochelles Reef off of the coast of Haiti and became stuck there. And the ship is still there today, and the shipwreck was discovered in 2001. In fourth place, we have the Patriot. Aaron Burr, the third Vice President of the United States, is most famous for killing former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton in a duel. Yeah, make all the Hamilton jokes in the comments. I will admit, I had the "pardon me, are you Aaron Burr, sir?" pop into my head when I was first reading about this particular wreck. But I'm not here to talk about the plot of the musical, but instead, the daughter. So Theodosia disappeared at sea at the age of 29, along with the rest of the passengers and crew on a schooner called the Patriot. The Patriot was traveling from Charleston, North Carolina to New York City in December of 1812 with Theodosia Burr aboard on a journey to visit her father. The last sighting of the ship was on January 2nd of 1813, when a storm blew in and the ship was never heard from again. Aaron believed for the rest of his life that the ship sank and that his daughter was dead, but wild rumors flew about the ship's fate. Some said that the ship had not gone down in bad weather, but had been captured by pirates, and the crew and passengers were taken prisoner or, killed. For years there were rumors that Theodosia had survived or washed ashore dead, or, that her killers had confessed. Perhaps one of the spookiest occurrences was the 1869 discovery of a painting of a well-heeled young woman in the home of a North Carolina woman whose family looted ships for a living. It had been found aboard on an abandoned vessel that had drifted ashore at Nag's Head on the Outer Banks, that's what she told the doctor who treated her. Theodosia Burr was said to have been bringing a very similar portrait to New York as a gift for her father. So let me know y'all's theories in the comments.
Next up at number 3, the Mary Celeste, which in fact may very well be the world's most infamous ghost ship, as well as one of the longest enduring mysteries of the seven seas. Built in Spencer's Island, Nova Scotia in 1861 and launched under the new name of the Mary Celeste in 1868, this merchant brigantine sailed uneventfully across the Atlantic for years as a seaworthy, efficient vessel. It wasn't until her fateful voyage in 1872 where the true ghostly legend began, which has since gathered theories that vary from submarine earthquakes, water spouts, an attack by a giant squid, and even paranormal intervention. No one will truly know the ultimate fate of the Mary Celeste, with every single soul on board never being seen or heard from again, which is a terrifying thought in itself, isn't it? The Mary Celeste was discovered adrift and deserted just off the coast of the Azores Islands on December 5th, 1872. It was a Canadian vessel, the De Gratia, which found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition under partial sail and with one lifeboat missing. The last entry in the ship's log was dated 10 days earlier, which detailed the vessel's last known location, before these mysterious, infamous events unfolded. On board was the ship's captain, Benjamin S. Briggs, his wife Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 8 seasoned crew members, all veterans of the sea. It poses the question, what dire threat did the Mary Celeste face that caused a highly experienced captain to abandon his ship? Nothing was stolen, all of the crew's possessions and cargo were exactly as they'd left them, but in all likelihood, we may never know. Swinging in at number 2, the Flying Dutchman. Of course, this legendary vessel couldn't not make this list. The ghost ship that can tragically never make port, doomed to navigate the perilous ocean for eternity. In actual fact though, the Flying Dutchman has had such an impact on nautical culture that it's easy to overlook the treacherous tale of its origin. It is thought that the legend of the Flying Dutchman first originated from the 17th century golden age of the Dutch East India Trade Company, a mega corporation that had a stranglehold monopoly on the Dutch spice trade that ran throughout the 16 and 1700s, where tale was told of a Dutch man of war that was lost just off the Cape of Good Hope. Purportedly, every soul on board perished after being ravaged by a violent tempest. The following few days, numerous other trading ships reported seeing a ghostly, ethereal vessel out in the foggy mist of the ocean, flying the exact same colours as the Dutch vessel. Since then, the Flying Dutchman has gathered notoriety as the worst omen you could ever hope for of a phantom ship that heralds the demise of an entire crew, with sightings continuing all the way into the 19th and 20th centuries. In fact, perhaps the most recognised sighting was by King George V himself during a 3-year voyage in 1881 just off the coast of Australia. He noted in his personal log that 13 people had seen the same glowing Flying Dutchman in the early hours of the morning, and later in the day, the ordinary crewman who had spotted the vessel fell from the foremast and, in his words, was smashed to atoms. It's a little bit worrying, that one, eh? And finally, our number 1 spot, the Orang Medan. And where do we even begin with the bizarre, perplexing legend of the Orang Medan, perhaps the most terrifyingly unexplainable instances of a ghostly shipwreck in history? But, well, the leading physical theory of the Orang Medan may be even more horrifying than it first appears. As the legend goes, at some time in June 1947, an American vessel by the name of the Silver Star picked up several distress calls from a nearby Dutch merchant ship, the Orang Medan. A radio operator aboard the troubled vessel sent a message in Morse code. In rushed, confused dots and dashes, it read, "We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead." And then a few moments later, after even more confused dots and frantic dashes, 2 words came through very clearly. "I die." Then silence. Nothing more was heard of them. But well, when the Silver Star eventually located and boarded the apparently undamaged and otherwise seaworthy Orang Medan, what they found absolutely horrified them. Every single person aboard was found dead, sprawled on their backs, frozen in fear, with their mouths gaping open and their eyes staring straight ahead. There were no survivors, but even more terrifying, apparently no signs of injury or foul play. Just as the Silver Star crew was preparing to tow the ship to a nearby port, a fire broke out in the Orang Medan, which shortly exploded before finally sinking into the depths. Since this horrifying incident, theories have ranged from the vessel carrying a highly dangerous chemical nerve agent to an entanglement with the CIA after the result of a secret experiment to an unprovoked alien assault. But if you haven't already sensed a theme with this particular list, it seems that we may never know.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Mary Celeste. Don't be tricked by the lovely name, this ship is no fair maiden. Maybe it was named for one, but that's got nothing to do with their ghostly tale. This tale is a tragic one indeed, and one that seems ridiculously risky by today's standards. A captain decided he wanted to make the trip from New York to Italy aboard his ship, the Mary Celeste. Had he decided to bring a super experienced crew and a bunch of cargo, that would be one thing, but this nautical journey was no such business trip. Instead, he decided to bring his wife, 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7. That's a small group of people for such an extensive journey, especially when bringing one's family along. But everyone boarded the ship regardless and headed out to sea. Their journey should have been about a month, but they never arrived in Italy. Instead, another ship known as the Dei Gratia came across the Mary Celeste, floating aimlessly in the sea. Assuming the worst, the crew of this new ship went to see if anyone was still aboard. But they were never able to help anyone as the ship turned out to be empty. But it wasn't totally gutted though. There were still plenty of supplies in the larder and the ship itself was still in pretty good shape. Sure, there was a bunch of water on the deck, but it wasn't like it was gonna sink anytime soon. Stranger still, the lifeboat was gone with no indication as to why or where it was heading. So there the Mary Celeste was, without a captain, crew, or family, drifting in the Atlantic. It became one of the most famous ghost ships of its era too, as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle drew inspiration from it, and used this inspiration to write his short story, J. Habakkuk Jeffson's Statement. This tale was a launching board for many theories, from pirates to mutiny to cold-blooded murder. The thing is, nobody knows for sure what actually happened. The captain, his crew, and his family were never heard from again. Now, there are some more realistic theories that have come forth about the inexperienced captain not knowing the full extent of damage to his ship and ordering everyone maybe prematurely onto a lifeboat at the first sight of land. Even so, that likely ended in tragedy as well, as the lifeboat never made it to shore, or so we think. And with all those supplies still on board and the ship not going down anytime soon, it feels a bit like an ironic tragedy now, doesn't it? Coming in at number 4, we've got the Kopenhagen. 5 masts, and none of them prevented the ship from going ghost. You'd think it would be easier to spot that way, but hey, unlike our last ghostly tale, this ship was jam-packed with capable sailors. Well, partly anyway. The Kopenhagen was known as a training ship, which would often take a fair number of cadets. They would learn how to best run the ship so that their subsequent journeys might go a little smoother. One would assume that a training ship wouldn't be subject to overly harsh conditions, just like how any training is supposed to lower the risk of failure during a real-life scenario. Unfortunately, this was not the case. 60 sailors marched aboard this well-fitted ship, and once they departed, they were never seen again. The ship had all anyone would need to succeed, including plenty of lifeboats, an auxiliary engine, and a wireless communication system. So, what went wrong? Nobody really knows. It left the Rio de la Plata on December 14th, heading to Australia. On the 21st, the crew was in touch with another ship and all seemed to be well. After that though, they went totally silent. Some think they ran into an iceberg, others claim that it could have been something more sinister. Either way, darkness and fog definitely played into the equation. For years, the Kopenhagen was missing in action with nothing to show for it. However, some sailors did claim to see a phantom ship with 5 masts sailing the seas. Now, the ghost crew hasn't attempted to communicate with anybody yet, nor has anybody been able to get close enough to confirm what they've seen. But you'd better believe those cadets are seasoned sailors by now. Back in 2012, a wreck was discovered that many believe to be the Kopenhagen. However, this still goes unconfirmed.
In third place, we have the MV Salem Express. The story of this French passenger ferry is sometimes referred to as the most tragic shipwreck in the Red Sea. In December of 1991, the ship was about an hour away from the Safaga port when it crashed into a reef on the Egyptian coast. The ferry started sinking within a matter of minutes, taking the lives of approximately 500 people. The disaster actually sparked controversy over the number of lost lives, with officials reporting that there were 690 people on board and only 180 were saved. Today, the Salem Express is a popular diving destination because of its surprisingly well-preserved state. Divers can still see the remains of luggage, including toys, clothes, and automobiles. Some have also reported hearing the sounds of children laughing and car engines revving. Sure, because diving isn't scary enough with all the health risks. Gotta add some malevolent ghosties along with it. In second place, we have the Andrea Doria. So the Andrea Doria was an Italian ocean liner that currently sits off of the coast of Massachusetts. Before it collided with the Stockholm, which tore into the Andrea Doria's hull, causing it to slowly tilt on its side before sinking, 11 hours later, the ocean liner was considered virtually unsinkable. See, I'm making a face because if I had a nickel for every time a ship that was called unsinkable sunk, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Also, I'm just not big on tempting fate. The ship had been outfitted with the latest navigational equipment, including 2 sets of radar, and was designed with 11 watertight compartments. Now, the compartments were constructed so that the boat would remain afloat if any 2 were breached, and so that, she would never take on a list of more than 15 degrees. As an extra safety precaution, her lifeboats could still be launched if the list reached 20 degrees. Fun fact about the Andrea Doria was that it was the first liner to possess 3 outdoor swimming pools, 1 each for first, cabin, and tourist class. Now, the wreck only took 46 lives when it happened, but 16 people have since died exploring the wreck. What's left is in a remote spot at the edge of the continental shelf in about 240 feet of water, and most personal effects like money are still aboard. This makes the wreck very attractive for divers, but the ship's twisting passageways have become a fatal maze for some, while others have succumbed to failed equipment or decompression sickness, which happens when divers ascend too quickly and dissolved gases bubble out of the, red fluid under the reduced pressure. And that's why, while I love the idea of learning how to scuba dive one day, you'll never find me actually doing it. A little too risky for my liking. Despite having less name recognition than the Titanic, the Italian wreck is now considered by many to be the Mount Everest of underwater exploration. Some folks simply kneel on the historic hull, while others rummage through the wreck in search of mementos, such as, China from the well-appointed cruise liner to take home and frame. And hey, every once in a while, someone gets lucky. In 2010, 2 divers from New Jersey unearthed the 75-pound bell that once adorned the Doria's deck. Apparently it only takes 4 minutes to reach the wreck from the surface. Once divers reach the wreck though, things can get much more complicated. The more time divers spend breathing the specially tailored mix of gases required to survive at such depths, the longer they'll have to spend making their way painstakingly back to the surface. A typical Doria dive includes only 15 or 16 minutes exploring the wreck before divers must leave. And during those few minutes, divers affix strobe lights to the mooring line to help find their way back. Some hook lines of their own, wound into reels on their equipment, onto the wreck near the mooring line so they can find their way back when their time in the wreck runs out. Some of those who have died got tangled or lost in the wreck. Others have panicked, spit out their mouthpieces, and drowned. No big. A big part of the danger is the depth and the risk of nitrogen narcosis, which once again is a condition that can occur below 100 feet, in which too much nitrogen builds up in that red little fluid, causing a level of impaired thinking that is often compared to alcohol intoxication. In first place, we have the Hunley. The Civil War submarine, the H.L. Hunley, is a ship that managed to sink not once, not twice, but 3 times. Look, I'm all for recycling, but with that kind of track record, someone should have clued in after, the second time. When the precious kitty known as Unsinkable Sam survived more than 2 wrecks, someone eventually decided to keep him on land and avoid, cursing further ships. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Just saying. First demonstrated in 1863, the ship is famous as one of the initial forays into developing combat submarines. She carried Confederate Navy men to Charleston Harbor, attempting to break a Union blockade that was limiting the city. On the very first mission, the Hunley sank at the dock when either the wake of a ship swamped it or tangled lines dragged it underwater, and caused the passing of, 5 men on board. The sub was recovered and launched again a few months later. Some idiot on board left a valve open and it sank, killing the entire 8-man crew. The back-to-back disasters did not dissuade the Confederate Navy though. Sure, I guess we can chalk the second incident up to human error, but the vibes I'm getting are off. The ship was found, modified, and put back in service for a February 1864 mission in which it sunk the USS Housatonic, killing 5. And, it would turn out to be a deadly mission for the Hunley's crew. The sub and all aboard were never heard from again until 1995, when a team of wreck hunters rediscovered it with all 8 crew members inside. And in 2000, the wreck was raised. To this day, no one knows what doomed the Hunley's final mission. She may have been crippled by her own torpedo, or trapped by ill-favored tides, leaving the crew to die of asphyxia when their air ran out. They may have been clipped by a Union rescue ship that never even noticed the collision, or perhaps someone managed a lucky shot that disabled the sub's captain and sent water pouring into the vessel. I guess we'll never know. Number 5, the Mary Celeste. Probably the most famous mystery ship on our list today is the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that was found drifting in December of 1872 off of the Azores with her crew of 10 nowhere to be found. The Canadian brigantine De Gratia found her in a disheveled but seaworthy condition under partial sail and with her lifeboat missing. There were also signs that something had gone wrong. To be specific, one of its pumps was dismantled, but once again, that ship was still seaworthy, and there was no hint as to why the crew and passengers had abandoned it. The last entry in her log was dated around 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th and was still amply provisioned when found. Her cargo of alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board were ever seen or heard from ever again. Among the missing was the captain, his wife, and their very young daughter. On December 23rd of 1872, during a court hearing to try and establish just what happened, Frederick Soliflude, who was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, ordered an examination of the Mary Celeste, which was carried out by John Austin, surveyor of shipping, with the assistance of a diver, Ricardo Fortunato. Austin noted cuts on each side of the bow, caused by a sharp instrument, and found possible traces of scarlet fluid on the captain's sword. His report emphasized that the ship did not appear to have been struck by heavy weather, citing a vial of sewing machine oil found upright in its place. Now, Austin did not acknowledge that the vial might have been replaced since the abandonment, nor did the court raise this point. Fortunato's report on the hull concluded that the ship had not been involved in a collision or run aground. A further inspection by a group of Royal Naval captains endorsed Austin's opinion that the cuts on the bow had been caused deliberately. They also discovered stains on one of the ship's rails that might have been bodily fluids, together with a deep mark possibly caused by an axe. These findings strengthened Flood's suspicions that human wrongdoing, rather than natural disaster, was the cause for the mystery. On January 22nd of 1873, he sent the reports to the Board of Trade in London, adding his own conclusion that the crew had gotten at the alcohol on board and, killed the Briggs family and the ship's officers in a drunken frenzy. They had cut the bows to simulate a collision and then fled in the yawl to suffer an unknown fate. Flood thought that Morehouse and his men were hiding something, specifically that the Mary Celeste had been abandoned in a more easterly location, and that the log had been doctored. He just couldn't accept that the Mary Celeste could have been traveled so far, well, uncrewed. Arthur Conan Doyle, author of the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, helped make the ship famous with a short story vaguely based on the event, in which foul play explains the enigma. A 2007 theory, reported by the Smithsonian, suggests that perhaps the captain made the call to abandon ship in sight of land after the ship's pumps became fouled. Normally, it would be unusual for a captain to abandon a seaworthy vessel, but the captain may not have been able to tell just how much water the ship was taking on with the pumps broken. The ship was also slightly off course and had been battling bad weather, which may have prompted the captain to take the chance at land when he could. To this day, the crew of the mysterious vessel was never found. Also, despite many theories, no one can say with any certainty why the ship was abandoned. The Mary Celeste sailed for 12 years after it was abandoned, and finally struck the Rochelet Reef off of the coast of Haiti and became stuck there. And it's still there. It was discovered in 2001. Let me know what your theory is in the comments. Number 4, the Carroll A. Deering. This ship was built in Bath, Maine in 1919 by the G.G. Deering Company for commercial use. One of the last large commercial sailing vessels, the ship was designed to carry cargo and had been in service for a year when it began its final voyage to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So the cargo ship and its 10-man crew successfully made it to Rio de Janeiro in 1920, despite needing to change captains when its original one fell ill, but something strange happened on its way back to Virginia. A lightship keeper in North Carolina said a crewman who didn't seem very officer-like reported the ship had lost its anchors while the rest of the crew was milling about suspiciously. The ship was still in good condition when it was spotted from Cape Hatteras on January 31st of 1921 before it was torn apart on the Diamond Shoals. Another ship spotted the Carroll A. Deering near Outer Banks the next day in an area that would have been a strange course for a ship on its way to Norfolk, Virginia. Now, if someone wants to fight me on that pronunciation, I swear I consulted a couple of friends who live in Virginia for that one. The following day, a shipwreck was spotted, but dangerous conditions kept investigators away for 4 days. When they went aboard, eventually, they found food laid out as if they were getting ready for a meal, but the crew's personal belongings and the lifeboats were gone. So, what happened to the captain and crew? All 12 men were missing in action, with no idea what the heck could have transpired. A month after the Coast Guard began investigating the Carroll A. Deering, a new theory was formed related to the disappearance of another vessel, the Hewitt, around, the same time. The Hewitt was making its way from Sabine, Texas to Portland, Maine, carrying a cargo of sulfur when it sent its last message on January 25th off of the coast of Florida. When the vessel never arrived in Boston where it was expected on January 29th, a search began. The Hewitt and her crew had also disappeared without a trace, and the popular theory questioned if the ships could have collided. But the lack of oars, life preservers, or other floating wreckage disproves the idea. But 58 men were now lost. In April of 1921, a message in a bottle found by a man on the North Carolina coast seemed to give the answer to the mystery. Deering captured by oil-burning boat, the note read. Now the State Department began an investigation into the Deering and several other ships, and it was suspected that the Deering had been captured by pirates. Arr. Then the newspapers began reporting the possibility of a Bolshevik plot to steal the ships, cargo, and crews and somehow whisk them all away to Russian ports. By September, however, it was discovered that the message found in the bottle, the only real evidence of what may have happened to the crew, was in fact written by the man who supposedly found it. Mr. Christopher Columbus Gray faked the note in the hopes that he could discredit the staff at the Cape Hatteras lighthouse and take someone's job. It's a dramatic way to get a job, but hey, whatever works. The hoax had prompted investigations by the US Navy, Treasury, State Department, Department of Commerce, and Department of Justice. Without the note, however, the investigations fizzled out and ended without an official explanation. The federal government has followed numerous leads on pirates, mutinies, and more, but they've got nothing. So do I.
Coming in at number 3, we've got the tale of the Jenny. Now, the tales I've told up until this point have been mysterious indeed. The fates of the folks on board are up in the air and may never be fully explained. The story of the Jenny is just as mysterious, especially because it's been contested by a few folks, but the fate of the crew, if you believe the story, is more cut and dry, or should I say, frozen and wet. In this unsubstantiated story of oceanic horror, the crew of a ship named Hope came across what appeared to be a ship in pretty good shape. From a distance, there appeared to be crew members working on the deck. This struck the crew of the Hope as a little strange, as the Jenny had been missing for many years. When they got closer, it all started making sense though. The men they had seen atop the ship were indeed still there, but not alive. Each one was frozen solid, met with a frigid end. Yikes. Things got worse when the captain of the Hope decided to check out the inside of the ship, where he found more frozen corpses. The Jenny's captain was discovered frozen to a chair with a journal nearby. The final entry in his log read, "No food for 71 days. I am the only one left alive." That one sentence carries all sorts of latent horror, with images of more than 2 months without food in a horrible frozen environment. One has to wonder if any crewmates became food for the survivors, and what life must have been like as hope faded by the day. Coming in number 2, we've got the Baron Falkenberg. Here's a general rule for life. Don't kill your brother and his bride. If you can't abide by that, maybe you deserve to be carted out to a ghost ship and doomed to roam the waters until time immemorial. The good Baron was unable to follow this seemingly simple rule and ended up in a less than savory position. The story goes like this. One day, after being missing for quite a while, Baron Falkenberg's brother returned home. Folks were quite pleased with his return, and the brother proposed marriage to a lovely young maiden the Baron himself was interested in. At their wedding feast, the Baron lost his temper and cracked his sibling over the head with a bottle, killing him. The bride-to-be was terrified and ran off, but the Baron pursued her to confess his love. This didn't go over very well, and the woman told the Baron that she'd rather be dead than be with him. A very literal man, the Baron interpreted this dramatic retort as a request, and he stabbed her. Realizing the grave mistake he'd made, the Baron fled to the beach, where he found a man with a dinghy waiting. This man told the Baron that the captain was waiting for him and rowed out to a much larger ship off the shore. From there, the Baron boarded the ship, and for the past half a millennium, he's remained on board. This ship always seems to be heading north, flickering with blue flame and filled with skeletal sailors. And finally, at number 1, we've got the Palatine. Forget the Block Island sound, we're talking about the Block Island light. If you ever find yourself around Rhode Island between Christmas and New Year's, take a look across the water at night. It's said you might see an old ship blazing against the darkness. There are many stories about where this ship came from, and none have been officially confirmed. Some say that the crew had come down with a terrible illness and the captain would not let them go to shore. Others say that folks from Rhode Island lured the ship to the shoals in order to take what they could from it, killing the remaining passengers. And then there's the alternate version where the locals actually rescued the folks on board and nursed them back to health. So why is the ship on fire in the ghostly apparitions then? Well, apparently a woman was left on the island by the ship and eventually came to be known as a witch. She got her revenge on the vessel by imagining it on fire and cursing it for leaving her alone. This idea became more popular, and now the story involves a flaming ship.
Number 5. The Mary Celeste. Our first entry on the list of ghost ships today is the story of the Mary Celeste, a ghost ship where the crew abandoned it for a reason no one knows. In 1872, the captain, one Benjamin Briggs, cast off out of New York's docks to travel to Italy. On board were the captain, his wife, their young daughter, and a small crew of 8 seasoned sailors coming with them. The voyage seemed like a success until it was found by another ship, the Del Gratia. The crew of the Del Gratia approached the Celeste since it was barreling forward at full speed and full sail without anybody manning the crew. So the Del Gratia boarded it to investigate and found more questions than they had before, as there was barely a sign of life. If they hadn't found it freely floating, they would have assumed the ship had just been built. There was a little bit of water in the hold and a lifeboat was missing, but other than that, the ship was fully intact. The hull undamaged, the hold replete with food and water and other supplies. So what happened? Why would the captain and the crew abandon a perfectly serviceable, well-stocked ship, especially one that was carrying his own family? Now, there have been theories over the course of the years. Piracy is a fairly common suggestion, suggesting they were attacked, but if the ship had been raided, why did they leave all the food and water behind and leave the ship freely floating? It's not like a pirate to leave anything valuable behind, anything at all. The ship was still on course to their destination, and the logbook found on board stated that the Mary Celeste was on the right path, so what happened there? They were going the right way. It's worth mentioning that before this strange occurrence, the Mary Celeste already had a checkered history. It was originally known as the Amazon before Jeff Bezos sued. No, it was the Amazon, but it was given a new name after a series of mishaps led crews to believe it was a cursed ship. The first captain died of an extreme sickness, and on one of the first voyages, the Amazon crashed into another ship. So it was renamed the Mary Celeste, hoping perhaps that a new name and a coat of paint could salvage its reputation. If only that was the case. The Celeste was recovered and sailed a few more years before being run down for insurance purposes, and to date, no one knows what ever became of Benjamin Briggs and his crew. And if you're looking for more ghost stories, not necessarily nautical, but ghost stories of any variety, Top 5 Scary has loads of that and then some. We've got just about everything freaky you can think of. So click on through and hit subscribe. Please make sure you hit that bell. But would you kindly do that at the end of this video, because I got way more stories about haunted ships coming up for you right now. Let's get back into it. Number 4, the Jenny. Way back in the era of exploration, when ships sailed across the sea, the South Pole was one of the most treacherous passes an explorer could make, and countless sailors sailed their last expedition around the Antarctic. One such ship is a small schooner called the Jenny. Now, we really don't know much about this ship, the purpose of its original mission, really even who was sailing on it. What we know of the Jenny comes from the post-mortem, when it was found discovered by a whaling ship in the year 1860. The Hope was sailing through when it spotted a battered schooner, beaten but somehow still sailing around, passing narrowly through the gap between two icebergs. The crew of the Hope closed in. This was quite an odd sight. They recognized the English flag atop the mast and assumed the ship was in grave danger and needed immediate assistance, so they sailed on forward. They saw 7 men standing on the deck, although they looked gravely underdressed for the weather conditions and not particularly active at all. These guys were sort of just chilling out up there. It wasn't until the Hope sailed close enough that they realized the men they were looking at on the Jenny weren't just sluggish, but they were frozen remains. Frozen in place, as if they'd been frozen flash solid, as if it happened in an instant. They appeared to be in mostly good condition. I know that sounds incredibly bizarre to say that about a corpse, but they weren't showing signs of decomposition or any physical injuries. The Hope's captain, Captain Brighton, boarded the Jenny to try and understand what was going on here. He went underneath the decks and found a man slumped over a barrel with a journal in his hands. Brighton went up to touch him, but realized immediately, like everyone else, he had been frozen in place. So he pried the journal from his cold, dead hands and read the last chilling entry. Chilling. I didn't even mean to say that. That was a little pun. That's what my comedy degree paid for. May 4th, 1823. No food for 71 days. I am the last one alive. If the log was to be believed, then that would mean the crew had been sailing as corpses aimlessly for decades, as if not a day had passed. Captain Brighton took the journal home with him to return one day. And tragically, the wife of the Jenny's captain was found dead in the bedroom cabin alongside the ship's dog. The Hope sailed off with nothing more than the journal and left the Jenny floating across the frozen water, where she may still be to this day, or perhaps she's plunged deep beneath the water. Wherever she is, I hope those men found some peace and hopefully some food.
Number 3, the Octavius. The cargo ship Octavius met its demise in 1761 after leaving China and setting sail for Britain via the Northwest Passage. At that time, no ship had ever successfully navigated the passage, and the Octavius disappeared, proving it was no exception. A whaling ship discovered the damaged remains of Octavius on October 11th of 1775 and boarded it to look for survivors and cargo. When the men ventured into the below-deck quarters, they found the ship's captain frozen at his desk, partway through filling out the ship's log, and the rest of the crew were similarly encased in ice throughout their rooms. The whalers snatched up the ship log and fled the Octavius, leaving behind all, including the first and last entries, which were stuck to the desk. The log revealed that the Arctic temperatures and ice captured the Octavius around 250 miles from Barrow, where all those aboard perished on November 11th of 1762. The whalers, however, found the boat near Greenland, meaning it somehow made its way through the Northwest Passage, even with its crew frozen solid. Look, while Frozen might not be my favorite Disney movie ever, did anyone think to check in with Elsa or any of her ancestors? This just seems like a magical accident that could easily be undone. I'm just saying. Number 2, the MV Joyita. This ship was a 70-foot luxury yacht built in Los Angeles in the United States and launched in 1931. Roland West, who was a famous Hollywood director in the 1920s and 30s, was the first owner of the ship, naming it after his wife, Jewel Carmenil, calling the ship Joyita, which means little jewel in Spanish. The ship spent much of the 1930s cruising the west coast of the United States under both Roland West and its subsequent owner, Milton Beacon. It became a Pacific patrol boat during the Second World War, patrolling the seas around Hawaii. Although she sustained minor damage after running aground and had some of her components replaced with lower quality materials, she remained largely intact and in good shape after the end of the war, and by the 1950s was being used as a fishing charter vessel. On October 3rd of 1955, the ship left Apia in Samoa to sail to the Tokelau Islands. a journey of about 270 miles. Only one of her 2 engines was running due to equipment failure at the last minute, but the journey was considered safe given its short distance and the favorable weather conditions. So it was carrying medical supplies and wooden construction materials on board and had no dangerous cargo. She also carried 25 people, 16 crew, and 9 passengers, and the journey was expected to last around 48 hours. The ship was reported as overdue 3 days later, and no distress calls had been received. Flying boats from the New Zealand Air Force patrolled the same area that it was thought to be in for almost a week, covering a huge area of open water, but found nothing. Finally, almost 5 weeks later, on November 10th, the merchant ship Tuvalu, traveling to the Funafuti Atoll, more than 600 miles to the west, saw a ship drifting ahead of them. The ship did not respond to hails from Tuvalu, and the captain decided to investigate further. Investigation showed that the ship was empty. The crew and passengers were missing, and tons of cargo from the ship was lost. So while the ship itself was perfectly fine and in no danger of sinking, there was some evidence that something had happened on board. Parts of the bridge and accompanying rooms above the waterline had been damaged, and there was broken glass inside. In addition, stained bandages were found on deck, along with a doctor's medical bag. The one working engine was found covered in mattresses, but with sufficient fuel for it to operate, and the second engine was still partially disassembled and therefore non-functional. And all the clocks on board were found to have stopped at the exact same time, 10:25 p.m. Rather spooky. The communications radio was turned to 2182 kHz, an internationally recognized distress frequency. However, the radio itself was found to not work and was not broadcasting, something which may not have been obvious to the crew. Oh, and all of the lifeboats were missing. Some of the story about what happened on the Joyita can be pieced together from what was found by the official maritime inquiry. Like, for example, it's clear what had caused the initial problems on the ship. A corroded pipe, one of those replaced during the Second World War, was found to be leaking, and this allowed water to enter into the hull. It is very unlikely that the crew would have been able to find the source of the leak in open water. The damage to the superstructure of the vessel seemed to be unconnected to the problems they were experiencing, but may have added to the sense that the vessel was heavily damaged. The attempts to send out a distress signal and the lack of response may have led to a rising panic amongst those on board. The fact that whatever had happened had occurred at night also may have led to a lack of situational awareness, as the damage found was minor and would have been clearly recognized as such in the daytime. However, the decision to abandon the ship, if that's what happened, makes absolutely no sense. The 3 lifeboats were far less seaworthy than the ship herself, and there were insufficient life jackets for everyone on board. Furthermore, the vessel itself was perfectly buoyant even 5 weeks later, and the captain would have been experienced enough to recognize this. So while it seems that those on board decided to, leave the safety of the ship in the night and test their luck in tiny rafts, why they did this is a total mystery. Theories range from pirates, once again, to a mutiny amongst those on ship. The crew were never seen again, and this means that 25 people met their end somehow. Furthermore, despite the damage, there was no evidence of violence apart from the bandages, and these themselves suggest there was enough time for someone to administer medical assistance. No trace was ever found of the crew or the life rafts. And what caused them to abandon ship in the dark, only 50 miles short of their destination, remains a mystery to this day. Number 1, the SV Kaz II. So this is the most recent entry in our list, and it was found adrift 88 miles off of the coast of Australia, near the Great Barrier Reef, just 5 days after it set sail from Airlie Beach towards Townsville, Queensland in April of 2007. According to the investigation reports, it was sailing with a 3-person crew who were not experienced sailors. However, what happened to them remains a mystery to this day. Many believe rough weather conditions could be a reason. Others blame, pirates or even communists for the same. The vessel was found in perfect condition, except for the one sail, which had been shredded to pieces, and the 3 men were never discovered. According to investigators, they might have drowned while trying to untangle a fishing lure caught in the vessel's rudder, but others believe that a sea monster could have swallowed them.
Number 5, the Octavius. The Octavius became more than just a legend in 1775 when a whaling ship named the Herald found it aimlessly drifting off the coast of Greenland. The scary part? With all of its crew frozen dead by the Arctic cold's mist and winds. To add to the spookiness, the ship's captain was even found sitting at his desk with a logbook in front of him, finishing a log entry from 1762. The Octavius was a legendary 18th century ghost ship. According to the story, the 3-masted schooner was found west of Greenland, boarded as a derelict. The 5-man boarding party found the entire crew of 28 below deck, completely frozen solid, and almost perfectly preserved. The captain's body was supposedly slouched over the table in his cabin, pen in hand, with the captain's log in front of him. In his cabin, there were also the bodies of a woman and a boy covered with a blanket, and a sailor with a tinderbox in his hand trying to stay warm. The boarding party took only the captain's log before leaving the vessel, trying not to touch the remains or evidence of what possibly could have been the reason for the lost ship at sea. The last entry from the logbook was November 11th, 1762, which meant that the ship had been lost in the Arctic for 13 years. Can you imagine? 13 years of just traveling the Arctic, sailing slowly while frozen bodies lay still on board as a ghost ship? Yo, that's just like terrifying, okay? Like seeing a ghost ship sail up beside you from the fog, crystallized in frozen ice with the horrors that lay below the deck. Very sad, but also very scary, you know? Number 4, the SS Valencia. Side note, if you like what we do here, make sure you always Hulk smash that like button or throw a comment down below. It really helps the channel out. Let us know what other ghost ships you know of, and I'll check them out for a part 2 or maybe even a part 3. Speaking of more ghost ships, the SS Valencia is one of the creepier ship stories. Pulling up and finding a completely abandoned ship is scary enough. Those are people's lives lost. It's scary stuff. The SS Valencia was an American iron-hulled passenger steamer built for service in 1882 by William Cramp and Sons. It did many things. In 1897, the Valencia was attacked by a Spanish cruiser, Reina Mercedes, just off the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. They tried to sink her, but nope. She was built strong, and she survived. A year later, she became a passenger liner for the US West Coast, where she served in the Spanish-American War as a troop ship during the conflict. Eventually, after her service, the Valencia was wrecked off of Cape Beale, the west coast of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, on January 22, 1906, as her sinking unfortunately took 100 passengers with her. Some classify the wreck of the Valencia as the worst maritime disaster in, quote, the graveyard of the Pacific, which is a famously known treacherous area off the southwest coast of Vancouver Island. That's a horrible nickname for a shallow area also, right? Like, the graveyard? That's horrible. 6 months after the sinking, a local fisherman and his wife reported seeing a lifeboat with 8 skeletons in a nearby sea cave at the shoreline of Pachena Bay. The cave was reported to be around 200 feet deep. There was no definite explanation for the lifeboat's presence in the cave, but due to the dangerous seas outside the cave's mouth, the lifeboat along with its human remains couldn't be recovered. Local fishermen similarly report lifeboats being rowed by skeletons of the Valencia's victims just offshore as well. Most famous sighting was a rescue ship named the Topeka. Some observers on board, who were survivors of the just sunken Valencia, claimed, while sailing home with the survivors, a ship approached from the fog, and the ship passing was the just sank Valencia. The crew on board apparently now all skeletons. Yo, I'm getting the Curse of the Black Pearl vibes right now, are you? Like, that's scary, scary.
Number 3, the Orang Medan. That's a fun name. In the 1940s, there was a widespread story about a ship named the SS Orang Medan that had exploded near Indonesia, and its entire crew was found dead under mysterious circumstances. That's a pretty good ghost story. And like any good ghost story, there's a number of variants depending on who's heard what. Some claim that the Medan was attacked by a boarding party of rabid pirates, modern-day buccaneers. Others claim that it was smuggling dangerous secret chemicals that poisoned the crew and caused the ship to explode. And of course, we're on Top 5 Scary. I love wild speculation, so I'll say I think aliens did it, and who are you to tell me I'm wrong? It could be something paranormal. Interestingly, despite this story being so widespread and repeated, there doesn't actually appear to be many records of this ship. So did it really exist? Or was the whole thing just a ghost story altogether? It's believed that the ship was passing through the Strait of Malacca during the 1940s, and one of its first references was that of a passing ship that was said to have picked up a radio signal coming from the Medan, reading out the very creepy message of, "We float. All officers, including the captain, dead in the chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole of crew dead. I die." That's something out of a Stephen King book, man. The vessel was an American ship called the Silver Star, and it went out to investigate probably the scariest message you could ever get at sea. What they found they couldn't have prepared themselves for. The entire crew was dead with, I quote, "teeth bared, with their upturned faces to the sun, staring as if in fear." The ship's dog had died too. But most bizarre was that none of these bodies showed any signs of a physical struggle. Some believe the ship had been carrying toxic materials and poisoned the crew, and that seems possible, but honestly, given off of what I just read, that sounds way more like it's supernatural. I think demons were involved. If you've ever seen the movie Event Horizon, this seems a lot like it was an Event Horizon situation. Number 2, the Young Teaser. So they called me in high school. Unlike a lot of other ships on this list that had served as merchant vessels, the Young Teaser, true to its name, was a bit of a wild card rebel as far as ships go, and was a notorious pirate schooner flying the black flag and was famous for its speeds. The Young Teaser had made a name for itself as a dangerous ship around Mahone Bay, notable for several successful raids, which is a lot easier said than done. I don't know if you've ever tried to board an enemy ship, it's very complicated. A whole lot wrong can happen on the ocean, and in the year of 1813, the teaser had met a match it couldn't outplay, when it was cornered by a Nova Scotian officer by the name of Sir John Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke was a decorated military officer. He was a veteran of the War of 1812 and was looking to continue his path of glory, get another medal on the chest, by capturing the teaser and its crew and bringing them back to the crown to face justice for years of plundering. Sherbrooke was ready to board the teaser, but he noticed that a privateer aboard it had already begun lighting their own ship on fire. Instead, the pirates had chosen to go up in flames rather than face the noose back in England. Now, a pirate choosing death before capture isn't the most wild story. I'd wager a lot more pirates did that than Jack Sparrow would have you believe, but it's how the teaser's legacy carries on that gives it a spot on this list. Ask a Nova Scotian around the bay and they might tell you one of their more famous ghost stories. That on June 27th of every year, the otherwise peaceful Mahone Bay is overcome by fog, smoke, and the curdling screams of the damned crew whose souls are still trapped in the bay. They say on a real foggy night you can see the burning ship still sailing through. Some people even saying they see spectral sailors hanging off the riggings. Some boaters say that they see the ship charging towards them as if it was still marauding out and about, only when it's about to crash into another ship, it vanishes into thin air, leaving behind a cloud of smoke and fog in its place as if it was never there. And number 1, the Carol Deering. Now, we've been talking about ghost ships this whole video and, weird things that have happened to ships going missing, but we've yet to bring up my favorite anomalous triangle outside of Bermuda. So let's fix that, eh? Let's talk about the ghost ship, the Carol A. Deering. It was 1929 and the Deering was returning home from the Hamptons to Barbados, passing a Cape Lookout lightship. A man on the lightship called out to the Deering because he thought the crew looked aimless. They told him that the Carol Deering had lost its anchors, which, I don't know if you know a lot about ships, that's a bad thing for a ship to lose. The Carol Deering kept making its way forward. I guess the lightship didn't have any anchors to lend out or anything, where it was spotted again a few days later by a ship called the SS Lake Elon, with its captain reporting that the behavior of the Carol Deering was very odd. He described it as steering a peculiar course. And that would be the last time anyone saw the crew of the Carol Deering alive. 2 days later, the Carol Deering was discovered by the Coast Guard washed up on a nearby shore. The ship was missing its lifeboats and the decks were flooded. A rescue crew went in to investigate and were baffled by what they found. The ship had been picked clean. It was missing all its documents, all important equipment, belongings. It was stripped to the walls. The lifeboats and anchors were all gone and there wasn't a single sign of life in the ship, with the exception of one oddity. A beautiful feast laid out for the entire crew that had been untouched. Not a nibble taken out of it. No one knows what became of the crew of the Deering. There's always been theories. Some people think maybe they mutinied against their captain and fled. Some people think they were taken by the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Was their ship stolen? Or maybe they all just went home. We might never know. You let me know your theories down below in the comments.